I've done it with some clients in the past where I'm just like, sweet, we're just not going to weigh in. We're just not going to use the scales, and all I'm going to get you to do instead is focus on the actions that are going to make this happen.
The thing I often say to clients when they freak out about this sort of stuff is like, well, what control do you actually have on your body weight?
And again, this is something that you probably need to do repeatedly, just with clients in general, like not just with females, but they'll get hung up on the spike. So when we see an increase, and it'll be a random increase, and it'll be, was anything different the day before? Like all of that, and we'll go through the impacts of sodium. Maybe you ate more carbs, maybe you drank more or less water, like your sleep might have been, like all of the different things that may have contributed to that spike. But there's also the thing of just saying, if you'd done nothing different, that likely would have happened anyway.
I think that's the power we have on coaches as well, right? Like coaches want to be cheerleaders, and I'm all for celebrating wins, right? But you don't want to celebrate wins that actually reinforces sort of like a negative feedback loop. So Adam, welcome to the show. So I wanted to start with something a little bit different, because I tend to go through people's social media and Instagram accounts, and I find good questions, posts alike, things I think would be valuable to my audience and your audience. And you recently did an Instagram reel where you compared dieting to sex. And I can't think of a better place to start this episode. So for those who have not seen that video, tell me how dieting and sex are similar.
It was something that just came into my head, and I thought, you know what, I'm just going to go a bit left field with this post to see what happens. But I think the similarities are sort of, you can't dispute it. So it's like, I think in the video I went into, because this was a few weeks ago, so I was trying to remember what it was that I said. But it was like, if you skip out on the foreplay, you're going to have a terrible time. So it's like, if you're not, if you're not warming things up, if you're not getting the prep in place, if you're not getting yourself in a good position to actually go forth with the act, it's going to be quite difficult. It's, you're going to be in for a bit of a rough ride, and you're not really going to enjoy it. Like it's not really the best approach to take. So it's like,
give us some examples. Give us some examples of sort of like dieting foreplay.
I was just going to say thank you for saying diet and foreplay and not the other one.
I'm sure many of my listeners would need to learn that as well.
Just making sure that you're in a healthy spot. So if we're sort of like similar things to what I'll do with clients and stuff like that, it's just making sure that they are in a position where they're actually going to be responsive, where they're not going to feel that they're essentially pushing through mud when it comes to trying to get things done. So looking at things like resting heart rate, looking at things like blood pressure, looking at things like stress, like these kinds of things, and just the general mindset around the diet in general. Like, are you feeling in a solid enough position to actually undertake this, or are there potentially things that we need to work on first? Like, have you been trying repeatedly to make this happen for the past 6 months, and we're just starting again, and we're starting again, and we're starting again? And it's like, in that scenario, we might actually need to take a bit of a step back and just work on prepping to prep first. So like, getting some key fundamental habits in place, getting your health in a better place before we then undertake something that is, like on paper, it is a stressful experience to go through. You are sort of voluntarily starving yourself to differing degrees. So it's making sure that the body's actually in a place where it can handle that, and mentally you're in a place where you can handle that as well.
So I think there are going to be a lot of people listening to this, whether that is like potential like clients of yours or future clients, and people looking at this who may not know the science behind this, or even coaches that are just they don't know much after calorie deficit. So tell us a little bit about why things like blood pressure, why things like resting heart rate, why your health actually has an impact on fat loss when I could just remove food and keep as stressful as I am.
I think it's a lot of it comes down to behavioral things. So it's like, we can dive into the science and stuff, but it's like how all of these differing things can potentially impact how you feel, and therefore can impact how you actually behave as a byproduct as well. And it's like, if we're looking at things like high resting heart rate, low HRV, things like that, so like poor recovery and high amounts of stress, which therefore could also impact blood pressure and things like that. What we're really looking at is the stressful element. Like, we're looking at the fact that this person's under a lot of stress, whether that's psychological stress, physiological stress, doesn't really matter, because the impact is the same. So it's then looking at how that influences what you're actually able to do going forward. Because if you're in a really stressed state, you're probably not going to be sleeping very well. Your decision making is going to be impaired, all of these kinds of things. And then that's because of psychological reasons and physiological reasons. You know, there's multiple things going on that are going to be just making it very difficult for you to actually do what you need to do. And you're essentially fighting an uphill battle if you don't look to tackle that initially. And, you know, it's not to say that you can't push through it and still achieve the result regardless, because you can, you know, you can sort of make that happen, but it's definitely not advisable and you're not going to have the best time.
I think that's a really good answer, looking at the behavior thing, because I think too many people go to hormones. My metabolic rate is ruined because of this. When actually, when you look at it, it's like my poor sleep is probably more likely to have me not making good decisions with my food and overeating, and then forgetting about that overeating and then assuming it's my metabolism when I'm actually overeating. And I think that's something that isn't sort of looked at enough. People like to try and find a complicated answer when a simple one will do.
Yeah, and it's like we obviously do still have the impact of leptin and ghrelin. Like that is at play. Like that is going to be making you feel hungrier and not feel as full. But the decisions are still the thing. It's still the actual decisions that are causing the lack of progress or the, you know, eventual weight gain. If this is something that continues, it's like it's still the actual continual actions that are actually causing that downstream effect too. So that, you know, we can't just look at one without the other.
It's also a bit of chicken and the egg thing, right? And like coming back to what you can control, because is leptin and ghrelin out of sync and that's what's affecting your habits, or if your habits over the last 20, 30 years has affected your leptin and ghrelin. And at the instance, we have two options. Do we play the victim card and go, oh, my metabolism and my leptins, meaning I'm going to stay fat, or realizing that, well, even if it is the problem, what am I going to do? Like the actions that I'm doing are the same, regardless whether that is a problem or not a problem. Like I have to act first. Like there's a bit of a debate like now, like, you know, Andrew Huberman talks about it in one side and then you've got other people talking about it in the other. Andrew Huberman always says you can't change the body with the mind, you have to change the body with the body. So like, it's almost that thing of like you have to act first and that changes the mind and that changes your decision-making process. Where is your thoughts on that? Do you think a healthy mental state there's normally the catalyst for a change in action, or do you think it's the action that then will lead to a change in mental state?
I think it depends on the person, and I don't want to be that person who just continuously says it depends. But if you're coming from a very poor mental state, if you're really, really struggling, it's sort of looking at things of saying, okay, what's going to influence that positively? And a lot of the time, if you're really low, if you're really struggling with something mentally, whatever it might be, taking action is the first thing that is likely going to start to influence things positively. Whereas conversely, if it's not that bad, and you've done this before, like you've maybe had a few successful diets or training blocks in the past or wherever it might be, and you're just feeling in a little bit of a funk, then that might just be something that you need to wait out. But 9 times out of 10, if you just get cracking, then it's going to have that positive influence. So I think I'm sort of centre left. So I think I lean a little bit more towards the action comes before everything else. And if you're feeling a certain way about something, if you start doing something about it, then it's going to start to swing in the other direction.
I think I agree. I think I'm the same. I think there's no doubt that things like meditation, therapy, all these things are huge. And I think if you have a subconscious thing that you struggle with over and over again, I think that's where the mind will need to change. Like I use my ADHD as an example, right? Like constantly holding things off until the last deadline, despite them being easy, despite me knowing what to do. These are barriers that I face time and time again, or like putting, like when I work for companies, putting sessions into mind body, stupid stuff like that, right? Like doing touch points, like easy stuff that it doesn't come into my head to do. There is a mental thing I have to do. But when it comes to sort of like, I don't want to make this depression claim, but like when people are like in a funk or lacking quote unquote motivation, like doing a bit of meditation was never the thing to make someone feel invigorated to do more of it. Whereas if someone got up and did a really hard workout, or someone did some food prep, or someone went out for a run, there is going to be much more of a desire then to do that again following that. There's a much bigger short-term return on your investment. It's like saving money versus an investment account, right? It's like, it's that short-term, oh, God, I've got some money in my bank account. Do you know what? I'm going to do that again next month, and I'll have more money in my bank account. Or is that little kick? So I think I'm the same in terms of that leaning.
Yeah, it's like the big rocks versus the small pebbles, and what your big rock is might be someone else's small pebble. And it's like if you're not doing anything, and you're feeling a certain way, then doing something is going to be the best option. Whereas if you're already ticking the boxes with regards to training regularly, you're quite active, you're looking after your food, you're doing all of these things to sort of, have a positive impact on both your physical and mental health, but you're still feeling something, then that's where you need to then layer on the smaller pebbles of, what would then be the smaller pebbles of, okay, no, let's maybe look at incorporating some meditation, let's look at some journal and things like that. Because as you know, like these are things that I do, but they're not things that form the foundation of my well-being. They top it up.
Yes. Yeah, that makes sense. So like when you're looking at your prepping to prep thing with people, like I get this is so individual and what can the client do at that time and where they're at. But what are some of the things, if someone's listening to this right now and they say, God, that sounds like me, like I don't think my resting heart rate's high, my HRV is low, my blood pressure's high, I'm overwhelmed, I'm stressed. What are the actions? What are the big rocks that most people can just get started? And if they're and let's delve deeper because everyone can list off the obvious stuff. How does a busy person actually get them into their life?
So I think initially it's just assessing where you're at and what you're doing currently. So like we can't especially if you're like everyone's busy, like the term busy professional is thrown around as we know, but like everyone is busy to some degree or everyone feels busy to some degree. So it's looking at what is obviously feasible and then looking at what it is that you're doing at this minute. So if you're currently not doing any training, not really that active, like just all your movement across the day is just moving from one seated position to the next, or food sporadic, like you never prep anything in advance, you skip breakfast just because you just don't know what to do and you've not got control of your time, all of these kinds of things, which I'm pretty sure is a common scenario for a lot of people. You can't just start by doing everything at once. Like you can't just start by going, okay, I need to go on a diet, so therefore I'm going to track the calories, I'm going to follow this meal plan, I'm going to go to the gym 3 to 4 times a week, I'm going to do 10,000 steps a day, I'm going to do 4 cardio sessions, because it's just not realistic. So the whole prep into prep scenario is just looking at what are, again, the big rocks and the smaller pebbles that we need to get in place to make this successful going forward. And a lot of the time, it's that self-management element. Like people throw the word time management around, but time just is time. It just is. And it's how you manage yourself within that time. That is the key. So it's sort of looking at, okay, where can we start to develop some structure with your nutrition? Doesn't matter what it looks like, but where can we get some form of routine so you're at the very least eating regularly and some of that contains some vegetables? Where can we get a little bit more activity? So, you're sat at your desk all day. Can we get every 50 minutes or every 70 minutes? Can you go for a 10-minute walk? Like just a few things like that where we're just trying to layer in some habits initially so that it's not 0 to 100, because as we all know, going 0 to 100 is the thing that's going to make the wheels fall off and you're just finding yourself back at square one again. So it's just layering these things in so that when it comes to, okay, let's commence with prep, it's just one step further on top of what you're already doing versus going from nothing to doing everything.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I think people do put way too much on the plate, and I think that's with coaches as well. I think we see people who often, again, the busy professional tagline, right? Coaches like to work with people that have any job, basically. Like, everyone is a professional. Like who's the non-busy professional out there? They don't work with homeless people, is what they say. But when you're looking at these people, like, I think one of those things we all now kind of get down sort of like the time management and the decision fatigue bandwagon, and I think these are really, really good tips. But tell me someone that tries that with their clients and doesn't end up having to bang their head against the wall because they just don't take it seriously. Like their life's so chaotic. Adding structure is just the thing that's on the tip of the iceberg that is too much to do, even if it will save them time. So like, how do you get this across to your clients so they actually start taking that seriously?
I think it needs to be something like, again, depending on the person, but I think a lot of the time it needs to be sort of almost like definitive instructions. So like, here's what I need you to do at this time, here's what I need you to do at this time, because we've because I've established some time in your diary that you can do it with. And it's almost just looking at it in that way and being like, communicating with the person to say, over the next 2 weeks, how confident do you feel that you could just tick off this one thing? And if it's any less than a 9 out of 10, then we're not doing it, because it's too much to ask. And it's just being able to work those things out and like even using I use like a current client as an example. So she came to me because she needed to lose weight for IVF. Didn't really like going to the gym, didn't really like doing these kinds of things, had been trying herself with an NHS dietitian for 6 months, wasn't getting anywhere because it was basically every 6 weeks she was going in, being weighed, told, eat avocados and brown bread. And it just isn't helpful. So she sort of came to me and I was like, okay, what do you do at the minute? What do you enjoy? And it was like, she enjoys swimming. She tries to get out for walks after work, and these kinds of things. So I was like, okay, go swimming and go for walks after work. Let's just do that every day. So you either go for a walk or you either go for a swim. It's one or the other, but you can't do neither because we know that we've got that time there, but you do one or you do the other. And she's lost 10 kilos. Just from that one thing. Like, we've not been to the gym. We've not done anything along those lines. It's just been, what are you doing currently, and what doesn't feel too difficult for you to do it every day. And that's what's made the difference versus 6 months of just wasting time.
So taking a step back, it's ironic that we started this talking about the not skipping foreplay, and then essentially we skipped the foreplay of this episode. But going into your stories, you just said that you are essentially a female fat loss coach. You work exclusively with women, or just majority with women?
Majoritively. I don't personally. I don't want to fully close the doors to guys coming in, but like 99% of my client base are female because it is what I will specialize in, and I do feel like once you've got that lockdown, training a guy is relatively easy.
I also agree with that. So, you can push them harder. You don't need to consider stuff as much. But when most people niche down, especially blokes, when blokes tend to niche down, they tend to go for guys, and when girls niche down, they tend to go for girls. So what made you become a male coach for girls?
It kind of just happened naturally at the beginning. So when I first started PT, and when I first sort of like opened the gym and sort of like, this is now what I'm doing, it was the majority of the people that reached out were female. And I do think, especially in Liverpool, where I am, I don't know if I can speak for the wider UK as a whole, but in Liverpool, like the majority of the market for personal training just generally are female. It just is the way that it is. So 9 times out of 10, if you're a trainer, male or female, I would hazard a guess the majority of your client base are going to be females. So that was just the way it was initially. And it was a bit of a mix. Majority were women, and I enjoyed training both. Found it easier to communicate with females than I did males. And that has generally just always been the case. Like, I'm not really massively one for like lads banter and all that type of stuff. Like, it doesn't come naturally to me. I don't really enjoy that type of stuff. So it's like, I did find it easier to communicate and to almost relate to the female clients than I did the male clients. And then that naturally then meant that my messaging would be a little bit more targeted towards women. And then educationally dove into that and was like, okay, if this is the way things are going, then I need to be up to speed on this. And it was actually through a mutual acquaintance that we have, Matt Warner, who was like, he was the one who initially got me into like monitoring like menstrual cycle and tracking all that kind of stuff, because like before I met him I hadn't really done any of that, and he sort of walked me through that kind of thing. It was like, if you're not tracking this with your female clients, it's a game changer. And that was maybe only about 5 years ago. So like, even at that point, like I'd done like 3 or 4 years at that point without looking at anything like that. And then just sort of dove into it educationally, sort of upskilled in as many levels and areas as I could to be able to sort of provide the best service to females that I think there is. And that's something that I do kind of pride myself on. Like, I'll put myself out there as like the last coach you'll ever need, because I feel like I've got things to a point where if you are a female and you're wanting to achieve a certain thing and you want it to be the last time you ever have to go through this sort of process, then I'm the guy for that.
So going into the education stuff, as I'm sure you're aware, most of my audience are going to be coaches. If there's coaches out there that are struggling with their female clients, and we're going to talk through some of the common things in a little bit, but you said you dove into your education. Like, what are some of the educational highlights that you did that's made you a better coach with women?
So I think a lot of, this is going to sound quite, this could be taken one of two ways. So a lot of education in psychology. So that was obviously very important, because a lot of the time, like, as we know, if you've got female clients and if you've got male clients, there's more emotions that you have to deal with on the female side, and that's not saying that, you know, women are emotional. It's just like there are more things that you have to contend with because of the menstrual cycle, the change in hormones, potentially looking at things like PCOS, endometriosis, when clients are approaching the menopause, things like that. There's a lot of things that can impact the way that they feel. So you have to be able to understand that to a degree. And as a man, I'm not going to have first-hand experience of it. So I'm not going to know what it actually feels like. So I need to be able to have a solid enough psychological understanding of potentially what it is that they're going through, so that I can empathize and I can make the necessary adjustments to potentially manage those symptoms. Alongside that, you need to have an in-depth knowledge of female physiology, and it's not to say that you need to know the intricacies and the ins and outs and stuff like that, but you need to have an idea of the menstrual cycle, how it works, its impact on the metabolism, its impact on things like psychology, things like that, how it will influence food cravings at different times, how it will influence metabolic rates at different times, like how it will influence a client's stability and their ability to train at high intensity, like things like that. You have to have an understanding of what that looks like, so that when a client comes in the door and starts displaying certain things, you can have a rough idea of why. Like, you're never going to fully know exactly what is going on, but you can go, okay, this seems to coincide with what that would be, so therefore we can monitor that going forwards, potentially make adjustments next month to facilitate that and to make that a little bit easier. But yeah, those are the sort of the main two that I dove into. Is just the physiological aspect and the psychological aspect, and then it's just marrying those two together.
And then I suppose just laying that on top of the tried, true, and tested sort of fat loss science methodology that you've learned through all your other educations that we've gone through on the mentorship and all that sort of stuff, and then just finding out, okay, how do I make somebody stick to those things, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, like, do you think this is going to be sort of like an interesting question of how you're going to answer this? Because this could offend everybody, or this could not offend anyone. But do you think you have an advantage that females coaching females maybe do not have?
I don't know. This is a question that I ask myself consistently, in that I often feel like I don't. So I often feel like as a male, a lot of the time, a female is going to want to go to a female, and it's like that kind of thing. Again, I think similarly in Liverpool, where I am, there's a lot of female trainers who will have a huge client base because they're just generally more marketable than I am. So it's like there's a bit of a difference, but I do think that once you make first contact, once we start talking, like, in the actual service itself, I feel like I do. Like, if that makes sense. Like, I think because, and again, this is now coming back to what you just said, this could offend someone or could offend nobody. I think
I'll give my thoughts. If it helps, I'll give my thoughts, which may be a little bit more offensive.
Go ahead.
So I'll put you in you go first, but I'll put you in the clear.
I think because I've had to work really hard to understand and those kinds of things, to be able to get myself to in a position where I can empathize with you despite not having any of the lived experience, I think puts me in a little bit of a different situation than just being like, and again, this is a sweeping statement, and this is not to say that this is what female coaches do, but rather than just being like, oh yeah, time of the month, like, same, like that kind of thing, like, and that's, that's a generalization, and I'm not saying that is the case, but I think because I've had to really work to have the understanding that I have, I feel like it puts me in a slightly different position to be able to offer potentially a better service.
Yeah, I think that absolutely makes sense, and I can see that. I think as well, like, I look back at some of the, and now, thankfully, it really is the case that there are many more incredible female coaches out there. Like, 5 to 10 years ago, it was tricky. I remember working for UP, and we didn't get that many female coaches that lasted. Like, and I'm not saying that they're not tough, and I'm not saying it's always the easy environment to work in, but like, the ones that did were very, very good, and a lot of them left. And I was like, why is this? And I couldn't wrap my brains around it, because some of them are great coaches, and I think there's an element to this of, like, guys, rightly, you can say this is right, or you can say this is wrong, right? And I've seen girls who get great results with like male clients. Like I'll shout out things like Leanne Marshall, who's absolutely killing it. I'll shout out Amy Wilson. You know, I'll shout out Camilla Haynes, who's got some great results for male clients. But blokes tend to come into the gym and want the man because they want someone has the arms that they want. And I tend to find that a lot of women clients, certainly in London, maybe not in Liverpool, but certainly in London, there was at the time was a lot of female clients that wanted a bloke because there's an element of being able to just I want to be told what to do. And I think the women with female coaches tend to more likely slip into that sort of friendship zone environment, that rent-a-friend thing. And again, this is individual, but if you look at it on average, guys are probably more disagreeable, which comes with its own problems. There's good and bad things in this, right? Women are probably better than empathy. Guys probably have to work harder at doing that. Whereas us being a little bit more on the whole, and I say I'm on the agreeable side of men, right? Like I'm probably closer on the female spectrum here on this thing. But because of that, I think that sometimes they want someone to tell them what to do, and the girls don't do that in the same way. And I think that's where people struggle. Guys are a bit more to the point. But again, I could be totally wrong on that. And I do think the industry's changing for the better in that respect. There are educations out there is better, and there's some great coaches. But I've always thought when a female coach comes through and is amazing, I'm very impressed because I do think it's a harder game.
Yeah, definitely. I think I'd agree on all of those points, and I think as we were saying before, like I'm naturally quite an introverted person, and I'm very agreeable. So I've definitely got that element, which again I think kind of because as a female coming into the space as well, like as a female client coming in, I imagine it can feel quite intimidating as well to reach out to potentially like a male coach, like sort of like to take that step and stuff, whereas it might be a little bit easier to speak to a female coach and things like that. So I think that generally my nature, I almost feel like disarms that a little bit, in that I like to think that I just come across as a nice guy. So I'm easy enough to approach and easy enough to speak to, and that's something that I do really want to get across, to be able to almost to potentially put me on a level pegging from a marketing perspective. Because again, I feel like you can just sometimes come across as potentially a little bit, if you're a little bit too far one way, if you're a little bit too far in terms of like coming across as quite masculine in your content, it's all lifting and grunting and you may not necessarily appeal to the female audience. You are more likely to appeal to the male audience and like that kind of thing. So I think it's a little bit of a mix of both. Is like you need like a certain level of agreeableness and like, I don't want to say like feminine traits, but like you need to be able to have the prospect feel that they are able to be honest with you and tell you all of these things, and you're not just going to be a typical bloke about it and be like, don't tell me that, don't talk about that, just crack on, like that kind of thing. Like they need to know that I'm able to actually talk about it.
Do you think that sometimes it's actually easy to have that conversation with the trend of the opposite sex? Now let's put aside the anomalies where you have female clients that fancy you, or you have a female personal trainer that you fancy, or you like the look of, where that changes the dynamic. But assuming that's not the case, is there less of, because there's less comparison, there's less I want to look like you, or I want you to admire me or look up to you in the same way, that disarms the conversation where I'm more willing to talk to a male coach, because I'm not in my mind, in the back of my head, trying to compete or trying to, of course, they will probably want you to approve of them and have that sort of thing. And like everybody wants approval from the people that are important to them. But there's less of that direct competition, which all of a sudden makes it easier to chat to a bloke about your problems as opposed to chatting to another girl about your problems. And same with the men.
Mm-hmm.
Men, if I'm training with a massive bodybuilder, I don't want to tell them about my wimpy excuses and struggles. But I might talk to a girl and feel like that that's disarming, and I might get a better result that way. Do you think that sometimes plays an element of an advantage that you may have?
I think definitely, because I think it's almost sometimes as much as it's potentially emotional type chat, I feel like because I am of the opposite sex, it removes the emotion, and yes. It's almost like, especially if it's talking through something like with regards to the menstrual cycle or something like that, like if it's female to female, it can potentially just turn into like quite an emotionally charged conversation of just like, I feel a bit rubbish, like, you know, it's really impacted me on this. And the female having the first-hand experience can empathize, can sympathize, can do all of these things and talk to them and be like, oh, you know, it's just the way it is. Whereas, and again, that's a massive generalization, but I almost feel like a lot of my clients especially find it easier to talk about that type of thing with me because they know that I'm just going to look at it from a mechanistic perspective. So it's like, we're just going to talk through what it is and what's going on, and there's not going to be any emotion tied to it. And if they're feeling emotional, I match them on that level. We'll go into the psychological elements and stuff like that. But we're just talking about a normal physiological process without the emotions behind it. And it's like, this is what you're experiencing. Here's potentially the reasons why, and here's what we can do about it. Because I don't have the emotion in it.
Yeah, you do, and you don't get lost in it. And this isn't a female thing. Obviously, we're just talking about the menstrual cycle and female coaches. But I think anybody that has had a similar struggle, like we all talk about empathy as coaches, as empathy being the thing that we need, and it's one of the biggest skills. And I kind of agree and kind of disagree, because I think empathy is a crucial skill, but over empathy is disastrous. And I think it's what I call assertive empathy. I understand, but we have a job to do. And I think sometimes, like if I had somebody who, and I've worked with people who have ADHD, so maybe that's not a great example. But like early on in my career, I had someone who had the exact same struggles as me. I may be more willing to let them off them because I understand how hard they are. Whereas if it's like, okay, I get it, I understand how hard it is, but you have 6 weeks and we're a bit behind this week. So what are we doing next week to try and find solutions for this problem? You still have that bigger picture and that push in mind. Whereas sometimes, I have no first-hand experience. I can't say how hard the menstrual cycle is for women, and some women don't feel it at all, and some women have horrendous times. And I cannot relate, and I feel sorry for anyone who has a hard time with it. But if you're one of those girls that has a hard time, and you have a client that has a bit of discomfort, you might be willing to go, okay, let's not do this today. Let's not train very hard today. We'll have a bit of extra food. I know how hard it can be. And they might not feel it the same way as you, but you're coming from your experience, which is much worse, and then you allow them to back off. And that's where you not having that experience kind of goes, well, I understand that it can be horrible, but we can't do anything about it. So what we're doing to still make sure that you hit the goal at the end of the day. And that's potentially how you can push those people through it.
Yeah, 100%. And it's looking at it sort of through that lens and being like, it's getting to know the person, getting to know the client, because as we said, like everyone is different. So it's knowing when to push someone and when to also go, okay, I could, like, you're really having a terrible time with it at the minute. So it's useless as trying to push on, and it's knowing the difference between that. And I think, again, I'm in quite a unique position where I don't have the full lived experience of it, that I'm able to make a rational decision on it like that, where it's like I'm able to sort of look at it and just sort of look at the person as they are and their symptoms at the time and what it is that they're experiencing, and be able to make a judgment call, versus it just becoming a recurring theme of, okay, at this time every single month you feel a certain way, so therefore we're not gonna push the boat out. Whereas it can be different from month to month, as we know. But I think removing the lived experience of it and being able to look at things just from a purely zoomed out perspective and go, okay, but you're fine this month. Like, you're not experiencing it, so there's no need to make any changes.
I will say this, like, again, I don't want to generalize and make this is always the case, right? But I have mentored hundreds of trainers now, and I have seen clients who 1 week every 4, a female client will not come in and train because there's a time in the month and you just don't want to do it at all. I have never, ever seen that with a female client of a male coach. I've always seen it with a female client with a female coach. And I wonder if it's because when the client says that, the immediate response is, oh, I understand. Don't worry, we'll catch up next week. And that might have been the right judgment call, but they're so quick to go there. And and again, to make it sound like I'm not ragging on female coaches, I get the same thing with I had a while back where when I was working at UP, we had a thing where a lot of clients had this. Their clients didn't want to be used for social media. Now that's totally fine. Like if you're a client and you don't want to be social media, you shouldn't be forced to have your photos on Instagram. But what you found, it was like it's always the same people. And so is it how you ask? Is it what you do? Is it, and sometimes it's like that ability to assume it's on. And this is this is not just for female fat loss here. This is a general thing on some of these things. Assume it's on, lead with confidence. And then if something is really a problem, then the client can have that conversation where you can make a judgment call based off that. Rather than going in with trepidation and being like, oh, are you sure you want to do this? And like, because then as soon as something's uncomfortable, someone's going to go, yeah, let's not do that. And this is just one example of many through any coach, any gender, anything else that I see happens all the time. I think the outlook of the coach and the confidence of the coach is a huge factor in terms of how much you can get somebody to do.
Yeah, definitely. It's the same. Like, and again, I'll use a male client as an example, just so it doesn't seem like
yes, maybe. Maybe.
Yeah, it's like it's the things of, because like males will tend to be the other way, where they'll want to go, they'll just want to go gung ho all the time, and you're sort of managing trying to pull that back and stuff. And like I've had a couple of male clients in the past where like we've discussed this previously, where they need something and they're just not open to doing things in that way. So like if I have a male client come in and it's like, okay, your metrics are in this position, we need to do it. So therefore for the next 3 to 6 weeks, we're going to front load you with loads of aerobic work and we're going to do a GBT type split because this is the type of thing that you need right now. And they're just not on board with it. They're not open to it because they're like, no, I want to train like Dorian Yates. And it's just like, well, it's how's that working for you? And it's again being able to go into that type situation, be like, as the position of authority, like I'm not a dictator, like coaching's not a dictatorship. That's not what we're doing. Like there has to be collaboration between coach and client. But as the person who you've come to for support and advice to what you're working to, this is what you need to do at the minute because you're not in the best spot to go ahead with what you want to do. So therefore the result that you want to get isn't there. But you have to be able to go into that with enough conviction that they actually buy into it. And I find with males, that's very difficult, especially when you're basically saying to them, we're going to do, you know, full body type sessions a couple of times a week. And we're going to, you know, get you doing loads of cardio and stuff to just like, no, but I just want to do curls.
That's the disadvantage, right? That's the disadvantage of the disagreeableness. We've just spoken about the advantages of blokes being potentially more disagreeable in terms of maybe working with female clients. That's the issue. When someone is disagreeable, you're having to like find a solution and bang your head against the wall to find some way to make this disagreeable person agree with you. And I think using that example, I was thinking like, how would I deal with that? I was like, well, I would probably just ask the question. I'm not you. I like the collaboration. And I was like, well, how do I bring them into this conversation? And it'd be like, okay, so you want to be training like Dorian Yates, right? And I'm assuming you want to train like Dorian Yates and have it work like Dorian Yates, right? And he'll go, yes. And I go, okay, so is it working like that now? No. Okay, so if we do this, this is probably what's going to happen. And if this happens, you're going to get much better results training like Dorian Yates. So if you take 6 weeks off, you can come back to it and have it work like you always intended it to work. That's now a much more exciting premise to that guy, but it's still going to be hard work. He's still natural tendencies to go in and lift 40 kilo dumbbells if I tell him. It's like telling someone after physio not to press. I had my physio tell me not to do hamstring curls for the last 6 to 8 weeks. I was working on some issues with my hip and I'm just all length and range stuff. And I hated it. Because I quite like a prone hamstring curl, but I got past that point where now I was like, life gave me a reason to change. I was fed up of being stiff and being the guy that talked about mobility but had none, you know. So but a lot of people aren't at that stage. So it's like, how do you put that point across before you get to the point like I was with my hip?
Yeah, and like that's the whole sort of that brings it back to like the whole prep and to prep type thing as well. Like that's the same thing. It's like these are things that you need to do in advance of you getting back into, you know, some knee flexion, hamstring exercises. And it's the same with like the male client. It's like, yeah, this is what you want to do, but this is what we need to do to prep first. And it's like you can't, in any situation, is what we're coming back to here. It's just you can't skip out on the foreplay. It's like that always has to be there. Otherwise, you're not going to get the outcome that you want.
Yeah. So going into the female fat loss stuff specifically, what are the main differences that you found when it comes to getting women in shape compared to men?
You're not able to go as aggressive, obviously, on the nutrition side because we've got the sort of the changeable nature of female physiology and how almost volatile that can be in response to stress and stuff like that. So you don't want to apply too much is often what I find, or you at the very least need to get them in a very good spot first with that prep and to prep element where if you are going aggressive, you can at the very least get a good run on it before you need to potentially pull things back. So like you can't go as hard for long as you can with a male. So it's like that kind of thing. And I even find down to the level of deficit and stuff like that, same in reverse. If you're going for something like a 15% calorie deficit or something, the margin for error in that with a female is going to be greater because we're generally working at lower calories anyway. The rate of loss is going to be a little bit lower. Like, so the room for negotiation and the room for error is smaller. So you have to be able to manage that quite well, which I think again is where the psychological element comes in. It's all about managing the ability to stay the course, even if the deficit is less, and even if like those kinds of things, because there's just less room for making mistakes.
Yeah. I think that, that you've hit the nail on the head there. I think there's one thing that no one talks about the female fat loss that I do think is worth adding, because everyone talks about it from a, like, as you said, it's the hormonally robusting, menstrual cycles, PCOS, menopause, all these things that are well worth talking about and we'll get into. But no one talks about the fact that dieting, while you might not be able to go as aggressive in relation to their body weight, no one talks about the fact that dieting probably is harder for women overall because you are a smaller person, and that means your calorie intake, life isn't fair, is likely to be less. Like a 45 kilo person probably is dieting on 1,100 calories, especially in Hong Kong, right? I deal with people who are literally got fat to lose at 47 kilos, right? Yeah. That's normally, like, most people, that would be massively underweight for most of the UK population, guys and girls, but this is people's starting weight here. So it's like your starting weight's at 1,100 calories. And it really gave me an appreciation of, when people go, oh, that's too low. I'm like, in relative to what? People go, oh, 1,200 calories is too low. I'm like, this is a girl in Hong Kong's starting calories. It has to be. And in that case, you don't have that ability to go out for dinner if you wanted to lose weight. You have to be stricter if you're smaller, and that is one of the unfortunate things that people don't really speak about.
Yeah, and it's even looking at that the outcome that will provide as well, because again, you'll say 1,100, 1,200 calories, and everyone will immediately think that's aggressive, that's low, like I'd lose loads of weight on that. But if you look at it from, if we use a standard, like average weight male of 75 kilos, and then we take a 55 kilo female, so like average UK weight, for that male to lose say 10% of his body weight over a 12-week period, that's roughly 0.6, 0.7 kilos a week. So that that's almost, it's half to just under a kilogram a week. Whereas
so to give you the stats here, we did 12 calories per pound, right? Because I know me and you both do around the 10 to 12 calories per pound mark. So the higher end of our calorie ranges. That 75 kilo guy would be on around about 1,900 calories, or 1,980, so 2,000 calories. And what was the woman you said? 55?
55, yeah, thereabouts.
55, 2.2 times 12. The girl would be on 1,450. It's a 500 calorie difference.
Yeah, and even that 1,450, I'd say that's probably standard for the majority of female clients that you get in. Like, I'll say somewhere between 1,400 and 1,600 is usually where we'll be if you weigh around that. If you weigh 55 to 60 kilos, there's not really that much in it. And when you're looking at the rate of loss, even that is different. Like, if you're losing 10%, if you're 75 kilos and you're losing 10% of your body weight, 7 kilos. If you're 55 and you're losing 10% of your body weight over 3 months, that's only 5 kilos. And it's like, when you break that down to what that means on a weekly basis, it's mere hundreds of grams. Like, it's not a lot of weight. So it's being able to say, you're on this relatively what a lot of people will deem to be an aggressive number of calories, like a low number of calories, which in relation to your body weight, it isn't. And even the return you're getting on that on a week-to-week basis is so small that the key thing that we have to focus on throughout that process is just your ability to keep doing it despite it feeling like nothing's happening.
That's a really interesting thing as well, because it's we're bought into these huge weight loss stories, right? And when we look at even good weight loss stories, it doesn't even have to be crash diets, right? We see before and afters, and even if it's done by 0.5% to 1% of your body weight per week, people see week 1 to week 20, and they see a girl that's lost 10 kilos, they go, oh, what you don't see is they only lost 0.5 per week,
Yeah.
And like, how do you? What are some of the strategies you use? Again, this I know appreciate this as individual, but to keep people motivated when you know they're on target, but they're only seeing the 0.3s, the 0.4s. They're not. They're expecting 2-3 kilos a week. Like, how do you approach that with your clients?
So it'll depend on the person, as always. It'll depend on the person. It'll depend on starting position, previous experience, all of these kinds of things. The type of like tactic I'll use to keep them on the path. So for some people, it might be the scale weight is purely for my reference and not your own. And it's being able to almost communicate that to a degree of just like take the reading, input it into your or tracking app of choice, wherever it might be, and then just don't think about it. Like it's purely a number, and I'm going to deal with the stress of it, not you. And it's sort of in that thing. And then we might start looking at other things for them to focus on. So all I want you to worry about is adding 2.5 kilos to your hip thrust this week. All I want you to think about is making sure that you're getting your steps in. All I want you to think about is taking circumference measurements once a week, and you focus on those numbers because they're going to be dropping. Like if we're on target in terms of the weight coming down, the measurements are going to be going down at an even faster rate. Like that's the key thing that we need to look at as well, because when we're looking at such a small rate of loss, and we also know that body weight is just generally so volatile and it fluctuates just regardless of what we do anyway, we can't focus purely on the direction of the scales, especially when the losses that we're looking at are so small on a week by week basis. So we have to look at these other metrics. So even in that sense, I've done it with some clients in the past where I'm just like, sweet, we're just not going to weigh in. We're just not going to use the scales. And all I'm going to get you to do instead is focus on the actions that are going to make this happen. Because I know it's going to work. I know that if you're able to do it and you're able to stick with it, it's going to work. So we're going to remove the tool that brings about these emotional responses so that you're not going to be influenced by whatever that number is in the morning, and you're just going to wake up each day and you're going to tick the boxes that you know you need to tick.
Yeah.
And it removes that emotional element.
Yeah, and it's all about getting people process driven. The thing I often say to clients when they freak out about this sort of stuff is like, well, what control do you actually have on your body weight? Like your body weight is literally, as you said, it fluctuates, but it's the impact of gravity that has on you. Like unless you are closely related to God, you have no ability to change this thing. But what you have the control of, like bring it back. Like okay, your weight went up and you freaked out. So what are you going to do about it? Like what can you do? Okay, I can get my steps up. I can eat a little bit better. I'm like, cool. So why is your focus not there? Like, you're not in control of this scale weight. This is like arbitrary to what you're doing. But you can do the actions that over time will lead to a drop, that will lead to a different trend. Whether it comes today, tomorrow, 4 days, 6 weeks, 6 months, doesn't matter. The actions always stay the same. And that's where people's focus should lie.
Yeah, I also find being able to frame it, and again, this is something that you probably need to do repeatedly, just with clients in general, like not just with females, but they'll get hung up on the spike. So when we see an increase, and it'll be a random increase, and it'll be, was anything different the day before? Like all of that, and we'll go through the impact of sodium. Maybe you ate more carbs, maybe you drank more or less water, like your sleep might have been, like all of the different things that may have contributed to that spike. But there's also the thing of just saying, if you'd done nothing different, that likely would have happened anyway. Like it's just the way that it is. And then waiting for the random drop, which they then celebrate, and then going up and going, did you do anything different yesterday? And it's like, no, all the same. It's like, okay, so how is that any different to the random spike? And it's just being able to rationalize on it again and being like, these things happen at random. You'll celebrate when it goes down. You'll throw your toys out the pram when it goes up. But both of them are happening in response to the same thing. So it's being able to just go, so that same thing has to remain unchanged. And over time, we'll see this happen.
I think that's the power we have on coaches as well, right? Like coaches want to be cheerleaders, and I'm all for celebrating wins, right? But you don't want to celebrate wins that actually reinforces sort of like a negative feedback loop. Like you don't want to like slam saying, "Hey, your weight went up yesterday. What the hell's gone on?" And in the same way, you don't want to go, "Oh my god, new low." If you have a new average weight low, then I'm like, okay, cool. We hit a new average weight low. This is good. Well done. But if you have you dropped a kilo yesterday, and if I start celebrating that like you're celebrating that, they are reinforced to get overly excited by that number. So I'm very much keen. It's like, cool, big drop. But you realize that's going to be an anomaly, just like the high one was an anomaly, right? These are probably the most inaccurate ones of the week. you weigh more than this. You know, like just bringing people back down to reality a little bit, which sounds harsh, but it's like the overexcitement and the over depression gets you nowhere.
Yeah, it's always, again, it's just about managing the psychological element, like, of doing everything that you can to make sure that they're able to stay on the path. So if that means if the weight drops massively overnight and there's a big celebration, it's being able to go, okay, yeah, brilliant. You know, this may be an indication that we're on the right track, but I need you to understand that it's probably going to go up again tomorrow, and that's fine. And it may then drop down again the day after. It may be up again even further the day after that. Like, we need to be able to understand that this is going to continue in this manner. And I need you to know that in advance. So yes, by all means, celebrate the fact that this is a new low. You've not weighed this low on the scales in 10 years. Like, celebrate that, but just know that it is, you know, transient. But over the next 2 or 3 months, that's going to be solidified. Like, you're going to be even less than that. And some days you may be a little bit above it, but it's being able to look at things and just being like, we've hit that point. It's great. It's not going to stay there forever, especially within the next couple of days. But over the next few weeks, we're going to really be able to solidify the fact that that's probably going to be your new body weight and then some. But that doesn't happen now.
Yes, yeah, I think that's great. So going back, you mentioned earlier on about pardon me, the menstrual cycle, and you being able to look at it as from a mechanistic, that's a hard word to say, perspective, right? So I think this is a topic, the menstrual cycle of women, that I think is massively overcomplicated, particularly with coaches, right? And there's people talking about, like, you know, week 1 you should have like this many grams of carbs and go low fat, and the next week you should change your macros to this, and the week after that you should change your macros to this, and then you should go high volume week 1 and low volume week 2. And I'm like, someone has never tracked a macro in their life, and now you're giving them 4 different diet plans for 4 different weeks. So when it comes to training around the menstrual cycle, and we know everyone's going to be different, so this is another important question. What is actually important to know for girls trying to do it or guys trying to coach their girls?
The way I tend to look at it, and one thing that I'm incredibly grateful for at the minute, is that there has just been a new study out to say that there's literally no fucking need to change the training. It doesn't really influence things. So that's quite good, because it's not something that I've actually ever done. So I've never really gone, okay, we're going to train more HIIT training this week, we're going to do more of this that week. Like, I've never done anything like that, because I've always sort of looked at it in a way of just being like, all I'm really going to manipulate, if I feel like we need to for you, is volume. Like, if there's a week where you're really, really struggling, then okay, we're just going to reduce the volume slightly. And, you know, the same way we would if you're under recovered for any reason. Like, I'm just going to potentially manipulate a couple of sessions to make sure that you're not potentially digging yourself into a further hole of recovery. But the way I tend to view things, and the way I will tend to make adjustments, is, again, dependent on the individual, but I'm mostly focused on week 4. So that's sort of like PMS, PMD week, where they're likely going to be feeling the most, you know, negative impact and stuff like that. That's the week that I will tend to focus on, and I'll see how they feel that week. Like, that's my main marker of how we potentially need to manipulate things going forward. So it's like, in the week leading up to you coming onto your period, how do you feel? What's going on? How is your appetite? How's your recovery? How's your sleep? All of these kinds of things, so that I'm able to get a better picture of how badly they are impacted by these changing levels of hormones. The weeks before that, they don't really, you know, they don't really tend to, in my experience at the very least, with every client that I've had, they don't really notice any sort of adverse effects those first few weeks. And it's always just the week before they're about to come on that it's like, this is the week that's very difficult. And I've had some clients in the past where that has meant that week, we just don't really do that much, like, because it's impacted them that badly. And it's like, if you're really struggling, if you're in loads of pain, then there's not a whole lot that we can do with that. So we'll try and train, we'll reduce the volume, we'll potentially look at keeping a few more reps in reserve, and we'll just treat it like a deload week. We'll increase your calories because your appetite's through the roof, metabolic rate's probably a little bit different. So we'll just focus on that week being a little bit of recovery, and then we're back to it from next week. And what that often means is we're just doing intermittent caloric restriction. So we're doing 3 weeks of a deficit, 1 week at maintenance. That still leads to a good result. Like, that still leads to progress, but a lot of the time, again, it can be quite a hard sell to say we're only going to diet for 3 weeks out of the month. But again, it acts as a psychological break as well. It's like that's the week that they find the most difficult. That's the week where if I tried to keep pushing them, they're more likely to just completely fall off, and it's going to be more difficult. So lean into it on that week and go, okay, we're actually going to support how you're feeling. We're going to give you a bit more food. We're going to potentially reduce activity a little bit if you feel like you're not able to really put that into it. And therefore, you're not going to have as terrible a time this week, which means that when next week comes around, we can just crack on again.
Mm. I think when you're looking at that, it's almost like, as I said, everyone's going to be slightly different in this. Some people are going to be horrendously, with it, and some people are not barely not going to feel it at all. So it's that giving that person almost that option. Like I've played around with things like on that week you can get an extra 200 to 250 calories. Now that's not enough to take you out of a deficit. You're still in the deficit that week. But for every client that uses that extra, it's like, oh, okay, that's good. I can take the pressure off myself. I'm not trying to fight it, which is just on a hide to nothing, burn the candle at both ends. But at the same time, someone might not need it and don't use it, and they stay in the deficit, and we just keep dieting. And it's then with the training, it's sort of like you said, there's not really much to change. If you feel uncomfortable, well, maybe we just don't do barbell hip thrust this week, and just make those little auto regulations. I think the only thing I would essentially add to that is I tend to look at it month to month. So if I track that on a cycle, I can go when they freak out about the weight, which will probably, in my experience, I don't know if this is the same for you, but the week of or the week before is one of those 2 weeks. It tends to be where weight goes up. And it's like, well, when they freak out, which they inevitably will, and I'm not saying that's a girl thing. Guys freak out about the weight too, but there's less an obvious reason. It's like, look, this happened last month. This happened the month before. This happened the month before that. And you dropped 2 kilos on the Monday every single time. So it's okay. Yeah. Monday's coming.
Yeah, you can almost see it like clockwork. Like I almost get sick of myself from saying it. Of like it's in the first couple of months while they're sort of getting used to seeing those fluctuations and stuff, it's being able to explain in the 3 to 5 days before you come on your period, that is likely the time where you're going to weigh your heaviest. It's not the same for everyone. It's not going to be the same for you every month, but that's likely the time when you're going to be your heaviest. After you sort of commence menses, 3 to 5 days after that, you're probably going to be at your lightest. And it's being able to sort of do it in that sense and being able to almost see like clockwork, like when that spike happens and they start to panic, it's, oh no, well, I mean, like, when are you due on? Like, oh, on Sunday. Like, okay, sweet. So this is likely explained by that. So what I can tell you is that by Wednesday, you're probably going to be at a new low weigh-in. Like, you're probably going to have a new low weigh-in then. And it happens every single time like clockwork. And it's, even that gets more buy-in because you're able to sort of, again, I'm looking at it purely mechanistically and going, this is what is due to happen by law of averages. Like, it's just female physiology, changing levels of hormones. This is likely what is going to happen. And it's not the same for every person, but 9 times out of 10, I'm able to sort of call it like that. If we see the big spike there, I can guarantee it's gonna drop there. If we don't see the big spike, then I'm not going to make the claim because it's clearly different for that person. But
that's really interesting. Like, I've never looked at it to the day I've been able to sort of predict it, but I have experienced stuff like that where it's like I'll predict that we give you a refeed, you'll drop the next day, or I predict that you're gonna keep dropping in weight until we get to this amount of carbs, or whatever it is. When you do that, you come across like a wizard.
Mm-hmm.
And then as soon as you do something like that, that's, I think, the two quickest ways to get by with a client: get rid of a pain or an injury, and do something that makes you come across like a wizard. Just something where there's no way in their mind that you could have predicted it, and then you predict to the future, and all of a sudden buy-in just goes through the roof.
Yeah, because it's one of those things where it's like we can't influence your body weight, like we can't predict what it's going to do, but in certain situations you can have a generally good idea. It's like, I know that certain hormones are up here at this point, which is probably why you're weighing a bit more. I know that once you start your period, that's going to change, which means that your level of water retention is going to be different, which means that if everything is about the same, you're probably going to be lighter. And it's just being able to, again, just completely rationalize the situation and go, if all of these things are in line, that's going to happen. What happens after that point, again, it's anyone's guess. But it's just being able to look at things from that perspective.
So you did a video recently about girls needing to be more comfortable with eating more.
Yeah.
Explain why this is the case. Because every girl is going to be probably under eating, and every coach is probably going to be grinding their girls. So why do they need to eat more?
I think, again, it comes back to that like prep into prep type thing. Like, we don't want to be living in a perpetual cycle of trying to diet, which is what most people will do. And the thing that, again, makes it more difficult and why you feel like you need to keep trying is the fact that you never give yourself any time not to, and you never give yourself any time to experience all of the benefits to actually fueling yourself adequately. And especially if you're training, especially if you are like a busy professional, like these kinds of things, like the benefits of actually having fuel to actually give yourself something to do those tasks to the best of your ability. Like if you've never done that before, then you don't really truly know what you're capable of. And it sets you up for whenever you eventually do decide that you want to diet. And it's the same thing where I was speaking to a new client the other day who's got she's got PCOS, so obviously her dieting calories will like need to be lower, and like her main thing is she wants to be able to get to a position where if she loses the weight, she doesn't have to constantly maintain on poverty calories essentially. And it's like I basically explained to her in the same way. It's like once you've got there and we can establish a maintenance, your initial maintenance calories might be quite low, but just because you've got PCOS doesn't mean that we're not able to increase those still. It just requires the same process and the same patience and those kinds of things. But I think that should realistically be the aim for everyone. Like, yes, we can diet, yes, we can gain weight, we can lose weight, but it's the maintenance element that's difficult. And what makes the maintenance element easier is getting comfortable eating more food to be able to move that maintenance level higher over time.
And I also think when you're looking at people with things like PCOS or other inflammatory conditions, gut issues, things like this, while a deficit can initially alleviate symptoms of those things because you can start to bring inflammation down, being in a stressful state of the body is not going to be the thing that solves that issue. Like fueling yourself and actually getting to a point where you hit maintenance calories a while and take that stress off, it's like that's the thing that's probably going to eventually going to be the thing that allows the body to work well. Like PCOS is a prime example of the body saying, well, look, if I'm getting chased by a tiger, I ain't going to prioritize like reproduction and health and immune system and all this sort of stuff. So, well, what can we control in terms of stress? We can control in terms of, our shutdown time, our lifestyle factors. We can potentially add some supplementation to bring this response down. We can control our training volume and we control where our nutrition lies. So if you can then bring someone to a non-stressful state there, that is something that's probably one of the easiest quick wins to long-term alleviate some of those issues.
Mm-hmm. And it's such a small intervention to have such a big impact. Like if you are chronically stressed, if you're experiencing all of the symptoms of chronic stress, those kinds of things, it's like we can look to tackle that directly by saying, okay, let's potentially look at things like meditation and those kinds of things, like everything we spoke about before. Or we can just make sure that you're being fueled adequately. Like, let's maybe start there. Let's make sure that you're eating plenty of good, nutritious food and stuff like that, and see that the difference that will make, because you're going through your day in a more optimal position. You've actually got fuel to do what you need to do. Like you've got brain power going on because you've fueled yourself adequately. And the difference that will make to your level of resilience and your stress management and your ability to handle what is there is massive. And that will then have a downstream effect on your overall stress levels.
So just to finish off before I can tell people where to go and find you, I've developed a sort of like closing question tradition on this show. And it tends to stump people. And this is probably the only time we have a silence in the show. But I do think there's an important conversation that not enough people are having. And I think it's good for people that come on here and have a discussion to actually think about this. So name me one thing that you have changed your mind on.
Oh.
Told you.
Do you know what? I feel like there's probably loads of things that I've changed my mind on, which I think is no bad thing. What have I changed my mind on?
And it doesn't have to be female focus related. It could be life. It could be anything.
Oh, now you've really opened the floodgates. Do you know what? I'm going to go down the self-development route. So what I've changed my mind on is the sort of there's a common thing at the minute. Like I think it started with Atomic Habits, where everyone became obsessed with self-development in general, and all of these like self-development books and stuff like that. And what I have changed my mind on with those is I used to drink the Kool-Aid, so I used to be big into it, and I've got bookshelves full of all of that kind of stuff. And it used to be the type of thing where I would only read for the purposes of learning or things that would make me question things and stuff like that. And what I find, whether it's because I've gotten older or whether it's just because I've read that many of them, that they all generally give the same message, I find it overwhelms me more than anything now. So you're reading through it, and it's making you question things, but it's making you go, fucking hell, like why am I not behaving in this way? Why am I not doing this? Da, da, da. And what I've changed my mind on is the impact that reading fiction can have on you instead, and how that can potentially lead to, you know, more conducive behavior to whatever it is that you want to do, like those kinds of things, because it's through the telling of a story that can make you sort of pick up on these things of human nature and things like that, as opposed to reading about, again, the mechanistic things. And if you stack these certain habits together, you'll do this and you'll do that. And I find that, again, a lot of these self-development books, they just regurgitate the same type thing, and it keeps people stuck. I think that, like, I often find myself in situations where I'm like, if I'm feeling a certain way, if I'm struggling with something, I'll be like, I feel like I need to dive into the self-development rabbit hole, and there's things that I need to work through, and it only makes me feel worse. Yeah. Whereas if you take yourself out of it and you read something that switches your mind off from that, you're more likely to be able to do the things that you want to do. So that comes back to what you said at the beginning, where like that sort of assessing the mental element of it first, then it'll take the action on the other things, versus reading the things that are going to force you to take the action, but instead just paralyze you because it's so overwhelming.
I think that's a really, really good answer, and I can absolutely relate to that. And especially someone with like ADHD, I feel like personal development books are written by people that are naturally good at it. It's like books, like it's like basketball lessons taught by 7'5" people to 4'3" people. It's people that buy self-development books struggle with like organization, self-development, and habits, and the people that write them love this stuff. Like they get off on it. So while I think, when you're looking at the advice they give in terms of structuring your life and systems and habits, I think these can certainly make your life easier. And I've got many systems that make my life easier. But most reason they don't stick to their systems because they can't shut their mind off, they can't relax, and they've never got a clear mind. So in turn, like, no system's going to work when you're all of a sudden just sort of like running a race all the time in your head. So yeah. I do think that, like, what can you do to shut off and do less and say no to more is actually probably more important than adding a new productivity management system.
Exactly. It's the same as with fat loss. Everyone's looking for the next thing that's going to help. And it's like, okay, I've read this self-development book and I feel the same, so I'll read this one and I feel the same. So I'll read this one and I'll feel the same. And it's not that you haven't found the right book yet. It's that you just need to throw the books away and read something else instead. Like read something that is not even related to anything like that is actually going to switch your mind off and give you that space to be creative and actually figure out for yourself what it is, rather than just being told, like, if you behave in this way or if you do this, then therefore this is going to be the outcome.
And you can never even be sure that's going to be the outcome. So if you shut yourself off, you can find solutions to your direct problems, probably easier than what this book can have. So for people that want to find out more about you, or women that want to train with you and all this sort of stuff, where can people get in touch with you?
So I'm most active on Instagram, at Adam Martin Coaching, just all one word. So yeah, that generally tends to be the place where you can find me. I've also got a website, adammartincoaching.co.uk, which has sort of a brief overview of what I do, why I do it, everything along those lines. But Instagram tends to be the best place to find me.
Awesome. I can absolutely second how good your content is. Like, generally, good production value, well put together, really, really good. And if anyone wants to find Adam, obviously you can search that through that. If you forget, go through my profile. There is a pinned picture at the top that shows this man's work, because you've just gone through finishing today, which is really sad, the first intake of my Coaching Confidence. Absolutely, like, good coach coming into it, hopefully even better coming out of it. So go and follow that. If you can find it, it will show his work. Phenomenal coach. Go and give him a follow.
And just to follow on for that there quick, anyone who is considering the Coaching Confidence course, the next one in June?
June, yes.
Yeah, anyone who is considering it, you'd be a fool to not do it. Like, it's been huge. Like, even if you are, a little bit longer in the industry like I am and stuff like that, it's still invaluable to sort of jump on and, refresh the things that you may feel like you already know. Like, education's a never-ending game, and you need to be able to just consistently reaffirm that, you know, what you're doing is on the right path. You will still pick up things that you were unsure of, which is exactly what happened to me as well. So yeah, if you're considering it, do it.
Oh, appreciate that, man. I really, really appreciate that. Thank you very much, man. Absolutely enjoyed this.
Thanks for having me.